Hello, everyone. My name is Abdul Haseeb Khan. I'm moderating this discussion on the behalf of Financial Crime Research Society and Institute. This society is a group of financial crime fighters. The society is based in Lahore, Pakistan, but this does not mean that the discussion would only touch upon financial crime issues in Pakistan. The aim of the society is to play a global role in the fight against financial and economic crimes. Therefore, we will also talk about financial issues, financial crime issues in other jurisdictions. By working across borders, we are also aiming to play a global role in fight against social injustice caused by the elites of the world at the expense of the billions of people by accumulating in ill-gotten and most of the world's wealth by corrupt practices. Today, we have two speakers with us to help us understand the economic crime and its impact on the society. First, we have Sarah Adenaike with us, who is a award winner by the International Compliance Association for her outstanding performance uh, in her job, and she is also a qualified financial crimes subject matter expert with experience in working in UK and Dubai and Philippines. And she is very passionate about empowerment and mentorship and drives players in helping others. And she's also she's also the author of the a very wonderful book, which is Things That University Don't Teach Us. It's more of a book which guides you in your practical lives. And then we have Umer Abdullah with us. He is advocate in High Courts of Pakistan, and he is the founder of White Collar Crime Research uh, uh, Institute, and he's also the member of board of trustees for Financial Crime Research Society and Institute, and he is a trainer in entry bribery compliance, and he is also a visiting lecturer in University of South Asia and teaching students legal system in Pakistan and history of South Asia. So that's these are our speakers who will help us understand the financial crime. So I would like to start with Sarah first. Sarah, hi. How are you doing today?
Hi, Abdul. I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm good. Can you please tell us what is your idea of financial crime and how it works in the society and how it impacts society?
To be honest, from my perspective, there's no universal definition of financial crime. I mean, when we talk about financial crime, different things come to mind, like white collar crime, economic crime, corporate crime. But I think ultimately, according to the Financial Conduct Authority, who published one of the pace setters for the UK, financial crime is defined as any criminal conduct relating to money or the financial services. So think about it in terms of it could relate to money or it could relate to financial services. But I think people tend to feel when they hear financial crime, it's only money that's involved, but it's not just money. There's so many examples of financial crime that is not just money actually being physically involved in it. So examples of financial crime can include fraud, which pretty much everyone has an understanding of. There's a range, variety of types of fraud, from identity fraud, banking fraud, theft, and all of that. And you then move on to things like money laundering, which is basically converting the proceeds of crime into a legitimate asset. Some people call it making dirty money, look clean. And that's kind of pretty much common knowledge. But according to POCA, the Process of Crime Act 2002, it's basically converting the process of crime, making it into something legitimate. So in the past, we had, three typical traditional money laundering stages: layering, placement, and integration. Placement is kind of when you try to put it into the financial system. Layering is where you try to disguise where it's coming from, and integration is where you kind of clean the money through the system. And obviously, crime has evolved from what it used to be. With the introduction of things like the cryptocurrency world, blockchain, transactions are pretty much moving at a very fast pace. And obviously, the more that's happening, the more the bad guys out there are constantly looking for loopholes within the system to manipulate just so they can carry out their ambition. Obviously, you have things like bribery and corruption as well, which is it's kind of a global pandemic, as you would call it. But in the UK specifically, we have the Bribery Act, 2010, and one of the most important sections is Section 7, failure of an organization to prevent bribery. And the only defense to that is if you can prove you have adequate policies and procedures in place. And I think this just goes to show us, and in the US, you have things like the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. But this goes to show you kind of like the landscape of how big the issues are, because if they're penalizing you for your failure to prevent bribery, it shows you the severity of the matter in terms of bribery and corruption. And obviously you have things like insider trading, where as a result of your position or access to information you have that is confidential and not in public domain, you share that information with someone, they then make a profit or use that information to prevent losing money. And that's all different types of financial crime. In terms of where we are today, my take is I feel like the regulators are always playing catch up. That, criminals by no means they're sophisticated. They have a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of technical know-how. They have a big team. You have a very volatile risk landscape. Back in the day, I didn't even know what Bitcoin was. I didn't know what cryptocurrency was. Now you're having all sorts of financial instruments. And I think they know that when an instrument is brand new, it's going to take the regulator a while to introduce legislation. So before that even happens, they're already, infiltrating that system. So you tend to have a lot of financial institutions that are consistently looking back at their books, doing a remediation. Maybe there's a law introduced. You have things like the money laundering directives that are coming out almost every other year, and they're constantly playing catch up. And that's why the bad guys. So it's like it's a bit of a tricky one, because the regulators are doing what they can. I don't think you can stop financial crime, but what we can do is minimize financial crime to the extent possible. And how do we do that? One, we need to understand what it is. So understand the different types, understand the fact that they can present themselves in different forms. It's not just the traditional way that we've seen in the past. I think one is the understanding element of it. I think the second element is having the right processes, policies, procedures, good systems and controls in place. If you're manually doing everything, you can't capture everything. But if you have automation alongside the manual, people to intervene where there's an escalation, then you have probably a better and robust system. Then testing your controls is also a very important one. Having checks and processes in place. In the UK, for example, you have first line of defense, second line, and third line of defense, where everyone is checking what everyone's doing. And when you integrate all of that, you should have a good or better picture. And I think one key element that we don't talk about a lot is training, and tone from the top. So training has to be a consistent thing, not a one-off exercise. Because even if there's a change in law and you train your employees on it, there's a chance they can forget what the changes are if this training is not consistent. Another thing as well that I think is very important from my experience personally is setting the right tone from the top. I've worked in very global, big organizations globally, and one of the themes that came out was the fact that the tone from the top is not always right. People at the top, a lot of them are money oriented, so it's all about the profit, the margin, and the truth of the matter is, whilst profit is a very fantastic concept, if you get things wrong, what you're going to be paying in terms of fines would potentially sometimes outweigh your profit, depending on the size of your organization. So I think is having the right mindset from the top, because if you get it wrong at the top, it doesn't matter what your ideas are at the bottom. It doesn't matter what you think as a financial crime SME. If you're not allowed to do your job and you don't have the autonomy to do your job, it's going to impact the impact you can make. It's going to impact the level of quality you can bring to the table. So I think the tone from the top is a very, 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 very important one. In terms of what I think, let me give you a stats that I actually found by PwC. Now, this is why financial crime is quite interesting. Financial crime is not just committed by people on the outside. Even people on the inside can commit financial crime. So imagine almost suspecting the people that you work with. I've been in an environment once where someone actually committed financial crime, and because I spoke the same foreign language as the person, I was called into a room to interpret some of their conversations on the phone, and it just shows you the depth of the problem. So it's not just people on the outside, it's also people on the inside. So according to PwC, they said 31% of internal perpetrators from the inside, 43% of external, that's from the outside, and 26% where you have both internal and external. So it shows you the severity of the problem. It's a global phenomenon. It's a global problem. But I think in terms of what we can do, like I said, educate ourselves is critically important. Understanding that it's a global problem. I think a lot of security organizations have to cooperate more with each other. There are certain jurisdictions that, as of today, if you're investigating a matter, obtaining information from those jurisdictions is very difficult because of the way they operate, and because in some of those countries they don't take financial crime seriously. In some places, bribery is not a big deal. You know, paying someone money to be first in the line is not a big deal. For them, it's business as usual. So I think it's fixing our mindset and understanding the depth of the problem, understanding how much it's costing to resolve the problem, because, you know, the government is constantly trying to put legislation out. Companies then have to spend money getting people. Everybody has an understanding of what it is. They have an understanding of the kind of problems it can lead to. They have an understanding of the fact that we live in a changing world. So even the regulators have to embrace change. The laws that they come up with has to reflect the changing world that we live in. You know, and I think if everybody does their job, from you and I to the government, to the regulators, to the SME experts, I think then it will start to make more of a global difference. If people start to collaborate together, share typologies, what they're finding in their country, perhaps, for example, what's happening in Pakistan, what are your typologies, what are people doing more of, how are you catching out on fraud, how are you keeping up with these changes? And if they start to share like a knowledge bank amongst the industry, I think it would help long term. But having said that, you can't stop financial crime. What you can do is minimize financial crime. I hope I said a lot there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It was such an insight, and it was a wonderful talk. I just wanted to pick up on a point when you said that there should be a mind from the top should be very clean,
yeah,
and it should be acting in integrity.
yeah,
I recalled the writing from John Perkins from he wrote a book on that the Confession of Economic Hitman. It is a very nice book in which he says that how profits are the only consideration for the corporate world, because they do not care about anything apart from their profits.
yeah,
Uh, but the question is, how do you think um, can we work on motivating or encouraging or giving incentives to the
yeah,
people at the top
yeah,
who are in key positions and who are making decisions
yeah,
to uh, to to set their path right, and they should act in a way which is more of they should carry on their corporate and social responsibility. They should not care for their shareholders only.
yeah, yeah.
How can we achieve that?
To be honest, it's a bit of I don't think there's a yes or no answer to that question, but it's a very good question in the sense that, you know, I've seen it happen in real time where you go into an organization, they say they want you to help them push for change. And when you start to introduce, you know, things that would help them shape, you know, their compliance structure in a better position and help them set the right foundation so they don't find themselves in a position where they're constantly playing catch up, remediating, going from fine to fine, you get a lot of pushback, right? And pushback in the sense that they see you more as a hindrance, even though you're on their side trying to protect them. So you get a lot of. So the question is, how do you handle it when you're getting those pushbacks? So one option is you kind of show them real life case studies of what's happened where people have paid billions of fine, depending on the size of the organization, based on an error or something they've done wrong or failure to follow their own. I mean, one good example is Barclays Bank once got fined, not because they didn't have good policies in place, but because when it came to their high net worth clients, aka the rich clients, they were cutting corners. They were not following their own procedures. So it's one thing to have in writing fantastic policies and procedures. It's another thing to enforce that policy and procedure. So I think the first thing is one, understanding the company's values and make sure that it aligns with yours. And sometimes until you get on the inside, you don't know what it's like. So when you're on the inside and let's say you find yourself in a position that they don't embrace compliance, they don't really want to know. On paper they do, but in reality they want to cut corners, which sometimes would happen. You have a choice to try to push for change, slowly, and they will come around and see your perspective.
Yeah.
But in the event that they don't, you've got to do the right thing. You've got to get yourself out of that situation, because I found myself in a position like that where I could clearly see that things were not being done appropriately. And whilst I was happy to help solve that problem, I needed to be sure they would allow me solve that problem. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with CEOs, CFOs, your hands are tied, because those guys pay your salary. So if they say to you, we know you're right, but we don't want to do it that way. So you then have a decision to make whether or not you want to continue following that trend they've created and be part of the problem, or actually you're going to hold yourself to a higher standard and do the right thing and advise them as much as you can, but leave that position so you don't find yourself in trouble. And sometimes you have things like whistleblowing. People sometimes would leave an organization, they would whistleblow if they feel there's a need to alert the authorities that, look, these guys are not doing things the way they're supposed to. Maybe you might want to pay them a visit. So there are ways to resolve that problem, but that's obviously worst case scenario. Best case scenario is you're able to convince them, i.e. with real life case studies, letting them see what it looks like when things go wrong. Also standing your ground, because it's very difficult when you're the one person trying to be compliant and almost kind of preach compliance, as it were, to everyone, and all of them are thinking money. So you guys are on different sides of the fence. And if you're not able to say what you're saying confidently and back it up with evidence, it's very easy for them to push you out of the room, because they'll be like, what's he talking about? You're just talking. So what I tend to do from practice is I make sure that I go in there equipped. I go in there able to prove what I'm saying, back up what I'm saying, with statistics, with numbers, with fines. And I give them life examples. Almost every other month, one bank, one financial institution is getting fined for different sort. I mean, one of the, like I said, that Barclays example is one that brings it to life. It's not until you do something bad, even just not following your own policies, could lead to you being fined by the regulator. You have the policy. Barclays had the policy. They had the policy, and what you tend to find is when one bank gets fined, all the other banks, they start to look at the reason why that bank got fined to see if they're guilty, so that before the regulator pays them a visit, they can quickly close that gap. So everyone's playing catch up. And then you have the criminals constantly looking for loopholes to exploit the system. And then the regulators are playing catch up with them. So everyone's playing catch up. Yeah. So it's like a catch up environment. But I think if you have the tone from the top right, I think it's remarkable. I think it's profound. And I think that's the kind of environment that you, as a compliance professional or financial crime SME, you thrive in. You'll be able to do your job, with full autonomy. No one is trying to influence what you're writing or your reports or what you're investigating, or you know what I'm saying? So it makes it so much easier for you to do your job. That's why the tone from the top is critically important.
It's quite lonely as a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Once a person is genuinely at the risk of being ostracized, especially in developing nations where corruption it works like the norm, the convention. It's a hit and a glorious way of earning among the lesser privileged.
Yeah.
And thereon, you mentioned internal perpetrators, right? And the very fact that that financial crime, it cannot be curbed.
Yeah.
It cannot be terminated. It's not like a pest control framework that it will be terminated. No, it's not like that. It's something which is the inevitable, I would say, the inevitable prejudice of mankind coming into form. Yeah. Because you see, Francis Fukuyama, in the annual review, he's a professor at Harvard, and he basically wrote this piece on institutional corruption, wherein he said that in developing nation, people usually tend to be more corrupt, and there usually tends to be more institutional corruption on those premises. Now, these people are most primarily, first and foremost, public fiduciaries, employed in public institutions designed to enable and facilitate the civil population of any any jurisdiction which is not privileged enough to go to a level where you would say institutional corruption based on favors and exchanges is more valued than bribery, basically. You see, corruption is the head under which bribery comes under. And then laundering. Laundering is part of the manipulation head. So corruption is something which is blatant. It is in your face. It is obvious. You see, now I see the UK in the Bribery Act. They have also set certain restrictions and limits on grease payments, on hospitality benefits. They've even brought deterrence to that level. However, in countries like Pakistan, you see, I went through this research wherein this research done on the institutions of Pakistan. Basically, the commercial businesses, the challenges that businesses face due to the plague of corruption in public institutions. Now, let's say if a trader who is selling a product which is to be licensed prior to being sold off, and then in terms of attaining that license, the institution would blatantly go and ask for gifts like cars and houses and such and such. This is actually the cost of doing business. Here, what I'm trying to get a grasp of is, first and foremost, the typology. The typology regarding white-collar crime prevention framework. Yeah. I've decided to enable this transition because this is a fairly new concept in Pakistan. You see, this is a new concept because people here, they are not aware in terms of the parliamentary workings, the administrative workings of judges, of lawyers, of auditors, accountants, and regulatory compliance managers in-house and external likewise, and then public fiduciaries. So right now, what I decided to do was that, okay, I mean, the list is vast, but I think in terms of acceleration of delinquent conduct, how many lawyers and how many accountants do you reckon would comprise of the entire population in any jurisdiction? Wouldn't be a handful of or more than half. No, it would be more than like 2-3% of the entire population. Now, these personnel, as Sutherland's definition, it states that, you know, highly intellectual, capable individual. Then again, the in-house protocols that you bring in. How do you stop that capable criminal from delinquency? I think this is more of a question of criminology and individual rates of crime transcending into group rates of crime and such and such. You see, there's corrupt politicians in Pakistan, and if you ask a rags to riches person or a rag dreaming of riches, he would glorify a very corrupt politician and say, oh, he did this and he did that, and he's wonderful, you know, he'll be jogging on the glory train thereon. But then again, that is the normative crime rates of society. They're higher. If you talk about individual group rates of crime transcending into prima facie, but you do not have a deterring mechanism in terms of application or operation. So instead of enhancing the KPIs of the relationship managers, you'd rather spend millions and millions of rupees on enabling a whole new department. But then again, that is not working as well. So ensuring compliance, I think, in a country like Pakistan, that also would require unorthodox approaches towards mitigating the detrimental impacts of corruption, bribery, manipulation, financial crime, white-collar corruption, whatever you call it.
I pretty much agree with the point of following the money, because money is the motivation for all the financial crimes, and if you follow the money, it's the motivation for the crime. Like you if you take money back, you are kind of taking the oxygen out of that crime, and they don't have any motivation to. Well, that's a debate of
I mean, I will just conclude on this. If I follow the money of somewhat of a godfather, a mafia person, an organized crime syndicate head, if I keep following his money, I'd probably end up in the UK. But if I'm following a duke's money, somewhere in the UK, that'll take me to Cayman Islands offshore, which is far away from the UK.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. That's I think a different.
I mean, when you follow the money, it takes you at places. It's unbelievable as white collar crime investigations. You know where they take you.
Yeah, it's a debate for a different webinar we'll obviously have. But for now, what I want to focus on is because Sarah is more into the compliance side of the things in financial crimes, and Umar Abdullah is more towards the litigation side of the things. So I would first ask Sarah about the compliance structures and how risk management works, and how important it is. There's no debate on the point that whether we should follow the litigation structure or the compliance structure. We cannot prioritize one over another. They both run in parallel, so there's no debate on that. But I just want to ask, what compliance structures contribute in the prevention of the financial crimes? Sarah, please.
I think in terms of implementation, that's where compliance comes in, because it's okay to come up with all these rules and regulations from the top and all of that. But I think in terms of implementation, compliance plays a major role in ensuring that the organization, as much as possible, to the extent possible, is compliant internally and externally. Obviously, depending on the nature of how your business is set up, some people need to be compliant across different jurisdictions, depending on the location and all of that. But ultimately, I think with compliance, it's a mindset, not just an action. It's a the way you think, the way you see things. It's all kind of different from your day to day, maybe for an average person, because in everything that you're doing, your mindset is you're trying to ensure that the business is compliant. So in the event that you able to identify anything that is non-compliant, then there should be mechanisms in place for people to flag that information. I think it depends on the structure of the team. In most places, what you would have is a first line, second line, and third line of defense model. First line is kind of where you have the RMs who reach out to the clients and all of that. Second line, you kind of have the compliance team. Third line, you have internal audit. So every line checks what the other line is doing. And the box stops at internal audit table, and obviously if there's external monitoring required, then they come in and determine where they want to assess. But in doing that, obviously you've got to have a framework that works. And how do you have a framework that works? You've got to have the basics, policies, procedures, monitoring tools, good systems, good controls, good members of staff that know what they're doing, support, ongoing support training. You also have to have the tone from the top right. You've got to have structure. You've got to have ways of quality checking what your analysts are doing. You have to have escalation points. People should be able to report a suspicion internally before you make a decision whether or not it's going to go externally to the National Crime Agency. So there's got to be structure. If you don't have structure, so I think for me, the first thing compliance help does, it creates a structural kind of compliance environment. And if you're working with the right organization, that the tone from the top is right, they also help to enforce and push those initiatives and put money into it. Like, they want people to be aware that it's serious stuff. What could happen if things go wrong? So I think compliance comes in terms of implementation. translating those laws into policy, translating those policies into procedures, translating the procedures into actions that we take, and obviously building your framework around that to ensure that you're compliant. So I think compliance has a huge role to play. If nobody was checking what anybody was doing, everybody would just do whatever they like. And the fact that you know that your work could be audited, it could be checked, it could be tested, it kind of makes you, at least you're supposed to try to do a good job. And if in the event that you do get something wrong, which sometimes people would, at least you can explain your rationale behind your thinking. So I think it also helps you almost kind of leave an audit trail of what you do. So when you do something, you kind of have to make notes on why you've done it that way, how you reached your decision, what investigation you carried out. So it kind of gets you into that mindset thinking, forward thinking mindset. Yeah, so I think compliance definitely plays a huge part in terms of implementation of the law, and bringing these things to life, basically.
So the compliance is in the whole framework of financial crime prevention. Compliance is where you prevent criminals from doing an act. And a criminal,
basically, we try to keep the bad guys out.
So you keep
as much as possible,
filter them out from the system. But
yeah.
once even from the gaps we have in compliance structure, they get through those gaps and go for a criminal act, or they commit a crime or something, then we come to a stage where we have to prosecute them, or we have to fine them, or we have to file in some jurisdictions we can go for a civil litigation for the compensation of the corruption or things like that. And I think that pretty much brings us to this other structure, other layer of the financial crime prevention structure, which is very much relevant to Umer Abdullah. And now I would like him to guide us on how litigation and prosecution and civil litigations and all that, everything that happens in the courts, in the legal system, how this helps to the financial.
Okay. So naturally, you see, I will because I am based in my country. I am based in my country, and my country has faced this problem for the past 60 out of 70 years. I will say this, that 15 years ago, people in this country got awareness of what parliamentary lawmakers do exactly for a living. So naturally, all the implementation of regulatory bodies that is passed in the Senate, now where you have an elective dictatorship, as in one political party, is the executive, and as such, they are now also the autonomous exercise of and discretion of applying that legislative enactment that they themselves have voted for in the parliament to get approved, right? So now we're at a stage in Pakistan where coalition is in parliament. Okay, so naturally, the parliament, it will provide the legislature. Now, the legislature is most often wrongfully applied by the executive. Now, that wrongful application is in contravention to what? It's in contravention to civil liberties of your white-collar personnel employed in public institutions. Now, when the regulatory framework is corrupt and rotten to the core, then what happens is the one oddball person out in such a jurisdiction, he has to, if he chooses to do the right thing, whistleblowing or public interest disclosure, he's ostracized, he's not protected. When he's not protected, if there's an honest man, then corrupted, vulnerable. He's the vulnerable white collar, right? So there's those, and then there's those white collars that are culpable. So I think there needs to be some sort of monitoring mechanism that draws a bridge between that. And I think there's a lot of background checks on employees that the UK employees. I remember in BPP, we were all provided with this general test, which they all told us to take home with us, which was to prove how likely is this person susceptible to the commitment of financial crime, because it's basically something where decision meets opportunity. So on that note, I will say this, that in terms of ensuring a white-collar crime prevention framework in Pakistan, I will say, in the words of Mr. Kokab Zubairi, as he said in the last podcast, that the risk mitigation and the risk minimization recommendations that the FATF has provided are to be complied upon. Utmost, it is of the utmost importance and essence right now more than ever that a neo-realist countries such as these, they risk the fear, of financial ostracization, you can say, after being imperialized now. So I will conclude on this note. Thank you.
Thank you, Umer Abdullah. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. It was such a fruitful talk you were having. I'm sorry that we are out of time. Otherwise, I wish we could stay longer, because
This was quite
it's such
fruitful.
an interesting thing to talk about, and you're never enough with your words. But we surely join back with more topics and more interesting talks and debates. And thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your time. See you next time. Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.